Collaborations have been a focal point for us editorially at TV News Check for much of the past year. And that's been really because of the volume and sophistication of collaborative work that's happening within the station groups, as well as we'll discuss today, with outside reporting partners as well. So this conversation is hopefully going to get a bit wonky in unpacking how organizations are getting better and tighter at pulling these things off and the tools that they're using to do it. So I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists today. Stéphane Guez is the co-founder and principal at Delette. Meredith McGinn is the EVP of Diginets and Original Production at NBC Universal Local. Kate O'Brien is the president of Scripps News at the EW Scripps Company. Kengo Tsutsumi is the partnerships editor at ProPublica, and Lee Zurich is the VP of investigations at Gray Television, where he also anchors the local news in my market, New Orleans, and is the closest thing to a saint that journalism has there. He is much beloved. So let's get right into it. Kate, I have said before to you and publicly that Scripps probably has the most elaborate web of collaborative relationships, partnerships between its stations, DC Bureau, the Denver Content Hub, and now Scripps News and Court TV, which are the two national networks that both fall under your purview. So you're in the midst, we were talking about earlier today with Adam Simpson, you're in the midst of this company-wide reorganization to maximize the news output. And I wonder if you can talk about a little what you've learned in that process about the best track for continuous, ongoing daily collaboration.
Is this on? Okay. I'll start by correcting the record a little bit. At the beginning of this year, both the Denver Hub and the Washington Bureau came under Scripps News.
Okay.
So it's slightly fewer number of collaborators, but it's what we have to do, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to be doing, is to work with the internal partners and external partners. I know we will talk about that, to create the best product for our viewer. And Scripps has 43 or 44 local stations in 37 markets right now, and Scripps News is the national linear product. We have, from the beginning of Scripps News, worked very, very closely with the stations, using their content. We are on the same system, so we have access to their content technologically, and having our content available to them. What has happened over the last year, however, has created many more opportunities that go beyond collaboration to consolidation, if you will. When you were talking to Adam about politics, at one point I was trying to send him messages through ESP, it wasn't working, to talk about the fact that the Scripps station group has a number of incredibly talented political reporters, that we now work as a web with our national political reporters, and we cover stories together. We are trying to do the same thing with investigative, the way you are doing at Gray, to work together on sharing content and building something that's sort of a greater sum than the parts. We do the same thing internally with Court TV, and Court TV does the same thing with the stations. So there are many, 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 many different ways of doing it, and the most important glue that makes it worthwhile and makes it stick is to have dedicated teams who are responsible for sharing the information with each other.
Sitting over the whole.
Sitting over the whole and communicating, because it's incredibly important to communicate on a daily basis, more than daily.
Right. Meredith, your position at NBCU Local also puts you over a wide range of properties there that are increasingly working together. One of the more interesting ones that we've looked at a little bit in the past was with Telemundo stations, and these stations are partnering to program and produce newscasts, and I think perhaps other content as well, in regions including the Northeast, Florida, Texas, California. We last checked in on these about a year, maybe a little less ago, and they were pretty nascent efforts. So what have you been fine-tuning, and how have you been evolving that since then?
So a few things. We've had duopoly markets for a number of years now. So we have the English and Spanish language journalists working much more closely together on story development, story coverage, and execution. On the FAST channel side, when we launched the NBC FAST channels, what we saw pretty quickly is that we were getting significant viewership outside of the core market. So we used that to inform how we built the Telemundo regional fast channels. Instead of standalone markets, we built them as 24/7 all news channels of a certain region. So South Florida, Northeast, Texas, California. Knowing that we wanted to produce more live original newscasts on a daily basis without completely taxing the teams, we came up with the idea of leveraging the multiple markets. One market will run the control room and anchor the show. Another market will build the second block. Another market builds the third block. Another market builds the fourth block. And what we're seeing now on these Telemundo regional fast channels, those newscasts are the most engaged show of the day.
It's a real jigsaw, the way that comes together. Because in New York, isn't it like 5 different stations that produce? That's amazing. Lee, you are an anchor, and as I said, investigative reporter at WVUE in New Orleans, where you have a very formidable reputation for your investigative work. But now your position has scaled out to run investigations across the whole group via Investigate TV, which is both an organization and now a show as well, Investigate TV Plus. So how have you developed a process, and we were talking about this a little bit outside just before, but a process to sort of nationally orchestrate that investigative work? Just if you can kind of take us through how you build that.
Yeah, it's a great question. 'Cause, like, typically, and we were talking about this outside, but typically people may see, oh, this is a story on a council, a local council. How's that investigation scalable nationally? And look, what we've tried to do at Gray is, we're in 113 markets across the country, and there are stations that do investigative well, and there are some that literally just, they don't have the capacity or resources or the talent to do it. But we know our viewers want it. We know by the research, we know that there is an appetite for this, and we need to do this to be good watchdogs in our community. So we really looked at a way to leverage what we have as a company. So we added this National Investigative Unit that does investigations across the country, and we share them with all of our stations, and the majority, if all, do run them. It's not necessarily a must run, but the majority of them do pick up the investigations. And we look at topics. We try to pick topics that matter over states, that can apply in Gainesville, Florida, and Charlottesville, Virginia, and Colorado Springs, Colorado, that are far-reaching. Sometimes we include little nuggets when we share the story that are relatable to that community. So there may be a statistic, a spreadsheet of statistics that we share with everyone, and they can localize it quickly in a lead-in or a tag like that. And then look, we've almost done it flip, I guess, way to look at it is we've had local investigations from our local stations where we do have robust departments that are just really good stories that apply in other markets, and we let those bubble up. So we're all of a sudden take that local investigation from a local market and share that and broaden that story out and collaborate that way. So we collaborate with the National Investigative Team sharing, and then we collaborate with our stations sharing up as well too.
And Lee also told me outside that his day is organized into 15-minute increments, and I'm not exaggerating. And he's got very large panels on his office wall with keeping track of all the.
And I blocked out every 15 minutes today for you.
Thank you, thank you so much for that. Kengo, ProPublica is a reporting brand that will probably be familiar to most people in this room, especially via the Hydra-like kind of collaborations that it has ongoing across the whole media ecosystem. But can you briefly explain its mission, how it's structured as a news organization, and how it's built to be collaborative in nature?
Yeah, absolutely. So ProPublica, we've been around since 2008. Our mission has always been and still is impact. It sounds super simple, but it's still sort of how we run things today, is like we measure our success as an organization and as like on a story-by-story basis, depending on, are we changing laws? Are we getting people out of prison? Are we putting people in prison? So that sort of thing. And so even as we've scaled upwards, that's always sort of been the way that we measure whether or not we're doing a good job. And they've done a very good job of sort of keeping that aligned. So, I sit on our audience team, but even still, impact is a win for me the way that it is for anyone else. And the way that the company is structured and has always been structured is sort of around the reporter editor relationship. Reporters are put on projects that can take like up to a year, or honestly even sometimes longer, and they're sort of given free rein to look around and find topics that are interesting to them. No one's really isolated to a beat or anything like that. We find something that's interesting that we know we can build off of, maybe even publish one story and that'll lead to another story and that'll, like that kind of thing. And so they're given basically as much time as they need to work on that. And then we sort of build the rest of the publishing process around that, visuals, audience, video, stuff like that. The other side of the house is business, it's fundraising, it's operations and stuff like that. And we have a pretty strict line between those two things. We're a nonprofit. We do get funding from places, but they're very, very sort of explicit about our rules when it comes to that kind of thing with funders. If funders ever want to tell us to write about X, Y, or Z or look into so-and-so, we literally leave the check on the table and waltz out the door, and everyone in the company knows that, and that's sort of really heartening. Sorry, structure, collaboration was the next part. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, how do you make these collaborations? So you're nonprofit, so
Yes.
there's not quite that pressure on the organization. There's some pressure, but how do you make them editorially viable for both parties? What do they get from you, and what do you get from them?
Yeah, so originally when we first started in 2008, we had people from the Journal, we had people from the Times, everybody's sort of print background, and they originally did partnerships sort of purely as a distribution thing. So how do we get more eyes on this story? We're a nascent organization. Oh, we'll partner with the Times because I used to work there. I got a buddy there. And as we've expanded and we moved into sort of more local focused stories, we did that via partnerships. We launched a thing called the Local Reporting Network where we partner with a local newsroom. We have one with WVUE right now. And we work with a reporter in a local place for an entire year. We cover their salary. We publish a work that they come to us with, and we can work on it together. And that's sort of how we started our local expansion. Now we have our own sort of in-house reporters. We have an office in Phoenix. We have an office in Chicago, Atlanta, and we have reporters sort of stationed regionally, but that's still pretty core to our local expansion strategy.
Okay. We're going to come back to this in just a few minutes. But Stefan, you are the technologist on this panel. Can you explain how newsroom systems have evolved to enable the kind of scale and complexity of the kinds of reporting projects that we're now seeing with great frequency among many groups?
So essentially, newsroom systems have evolved to basically adapt to the fact that the newsroom has changed a lot, especially in the last few years. The fact that not everybody is necessarily in the same physical space when they produce content. The collaboration has always been an essential aspect of newsmaking, but typically you are just physically in the same room arguing or trying to create something with multiple people. So now the newsroom system basically are essentially providing the structure to be able, the space almost, to be able to be the place where you do collaborate. And this is not just, it's changing the way people work. Now, this is not just happening to the news world. It's happening to everywhere where people work in an office. Now you have systems that basically are the place where people exchange ideas, exchange content, work together on a number of things. What has happened also in the newsroom is that it's the intensity of what is happening in the newsroom. So now you want to be able to, before a newsroom system was essentially to organize information. Lots of information, to structure it in order to follow a particular goal, typically, which is to produce the shows. Now it's not just shows, as everybody has said here and earlier today. I mean, what you produce is for linear television, for digital distribution channels. So what you do is very different. So newsroom systems are also more to organize the activity. So I like to view it in some sort of, somehow the systems are a sort of virtual newsroom in which you're going to collaborate, in which you're going to put information. It's going to help, collaboration. What do we call collaboration here? It's to be able to have people work across teams. We're talking about digital and linear and maybe other teams, or maybe you mentioned the team working in Spanish versus the team working in English. They need to collaborate around the same content. It could be across stations, across the country. A key aspect of that collaboration is visibility. You want system to be able to provide to everyone what is going on, what do you have, the type of content that you have, but also who is working on what, so that it's going to become much easier for people to work with each other. And maybe also to a certain extent, it used to be that newsroom, there was a sort of very rigid division of labor. You are editing content, you do just that. You are on the editorial side, you work with scripts, and this today, it makes no sense. I mean, if you are going to produce for all sort of different digital platform, everybody is going to want to be much more involved in all aspects of the news making. And I think that, what we, at least as a company, trying to do in terms of what type of news production system we are building, it's really to make it possible to make this collaboration more effective between people in different roles, between stations, between different groups, between different teams, things like that.
Dare I say this is a more holistic way of looking at this process?
Yes.
Okay, so it happens that ProPublica has actually partnered with both Gray and Scripps, fortuitously for this panel. So I want to walk through a couple of those projects in a bit of detail so we can talk about the collaborative architecture that they built in a very real and recent context. So let's start with the Gray project, which was called Railroaded. It ran on Investigate TV. Kengo, do you want to just briefly explain the premise of the story and how it came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, we sort of will put reporters on a topic and let them kind of mess around and find what it was. And incidentally, we had a couple of reporters looking into the railway system. This was even before the stuff happened in Ohio. And so they sort of found all of these ways that like the poor rail system was impacting communities and stuff like that. And one of the main ways was in small towns, these trains would just sort of like stop for the entire day or an undetermined amount of time. And so they found all these situations where like school children and were having to like crawl through trains to get to school, or fire trucks and other things like that were unable to get around. EMS was not able to get where they needed to go. And we found a number of places in the country where that was happening. Because we'd already worked with Gray on a couple different projects of varying sizes, and the top editor on this project, I do a lot of sort of internal salesmanship for stuff like this. And so she'd already worked with Gray and she loved working with them. She knew how the thing ran. So she was like, oh, this is inherently such a visual story. We know they have a bigger audience in all of these areas that are affected. Let's go to them with what we have and sort of build something from there.
Nobody wants to see little kids crawling through freight trains.
No, and
I've watched it. It's an alarming video.
Yeah, and I mean, Liam, I think you probably want to speak more to this, but it's like we can send a photographer, a ProPublica photographer there to get pictures, but to see it in video, which is one of the first things that Lee's team sort of brought to us, it just took the project to a completely different level that we would never have been able to get it to.
So let's take it then from, so it's kind of conceived then there.
Yes.
Where does Gray come in? What's the footprint? How many stations are involved? How many people? What are you pulling on that side?
So Kengo, he reached out to us November of 2022, and we had done a few projects with them before and had a good relationship. So we said we were in. And we went out there, we sent our reporter, Josie Sturman, photographer Scotty Smith. They went to Hammond, Indiana in February of this year, 2023. And I'll never forget, she called and she said, I don't know what to do because we are literally shooting video right now of children crawling under a train that could move in any time. And like ethically, what do we do? This is a powerful video. We talked through it. They shot the video. It was incredibly powerful. We aired the story in late April, and we've done some follow-up since then. We actually are sharing a new story for our stations today, where someone actually got video. They're making changes. They allege they're making changes, but someone got video literally of a girl climbing on the train, and while she's almost jumping off the train actually started to move. Yeah, it's some pretty powerful video.
And I know you had Pete Buttigieg, I think was one of the
Pete
sources.
Buttigieg, we've interviewed, I think, 3 or 4 times for this series. John Oliver, actually, Kengo emailed Monday morning because John Oliver featured it on Sunday night in his show, and actually did something at the end as own thing. So this made sense for a variety of reasons. I think the video aspect of it definitely did, but I think also the markets. Like, one of our big selling points with collaborations is that, look, we're in 113 markets, and, ProPublica does a great job on its website, I think, reaching, New York's and the DC's and the LA's. But if you're in Jackson, Mississippi, or Birmingham, Alabama, or Montgomery, Alabama, or, I can go down the list, that's where we're going to reach them and help share that ProPublica name and share the work that they're doing as well, too.
So we're talking about a 5-month period or so, roughly, it sounds like, this from incubation.
I mean, we started talking about about 5 months for the first story. So November we talked, and then December we had our first meeting.
Published in April or May?
April, like 26th, I think.
Yeah.
Or something. So that, and then we've done follow-ups.
Really quickly to what you were saying is, the audience thing, that was like ProPublica, God bless us. We write 10,000 word stories for, please don't repeat this, but for what I like to call the tote bag audience, is like the New Yorker audience, and it's kind of all the same, and we hit them quite well. We know what we're doing there, but that's not Hammond, Indiana, right? That's not these other places with these people whose children are crawling through trains. And so that's how I made the sell internally. And what really excited me about this particular partnership was that, when we start out with new partners, including Scripps recently, is like, we'll come to them with reporting that we've already done, and we're like, sort of take this and make this into what you will, knowing what you know how to do. But this was one of the first times for a project that I worked on where they got that footage. It changed the game entirely. They were like, what happens if we show Pete Buttigieg this footage and then interview him? ProPublica, we would have never done that. Something like so punk rock, like that would never have happened for us. And so they did that, but of course it ends up back in our 10,000 word print story. Do you see what I'm saying? Is like, it changed it into something that was a better print digital product. We used their footage. And everyone in the newsroom could see, like, this is what happens if you sort of like expand and collaborate.
And I think that the best part about collaborations, especially like this with teams from different mediums, is that you have different ideas, and we learn from them and they learn from us. And I think the stories are better because of it. Mm-hmm. This is a perfect example. Mm-hmm.
Tote bags and TV can be together then. Okay, I want to hear about the Scripps News project now. Kate, you did this collaboration that was more recent, I think just last month. Can you briefly frame up the project, Hope Denied, and the premise of it?
Well, actually, this is another situation where the mighty Kengo brought the idea to Scripps News. And this is, by the way, the first time I've ever met Kengo. He worked with our team. So I don't even know what prompted you to bring the project to Scripps News.
I can tell you.
Yeah, tell us.
So your team had approached us. They saw Railroaded, and they approached me sort of just generally to be like, we want to work together. And I was like, great. I don't know what on. Like, I have to figure out who's working on what story and how to sell it to them and who's going to be a good partner. And so, I had your team on the mind. I was starting to sort of understand the massive infrastructure you have, the channel, the shows, and those things. And, my first approach is always like, talk to the reporters. Like, reporters, especially print ones, are total weirdos, but they love to talk about what they're working on. And so that's how I always start to get buy-in. And so I was talking to a really green reporter that we had, Maya Miller, who was working on this insurance denials story that was part of a larger series we'd already been doing. And it was about this man named Forrest Van Patten who died after his insurance company repeatedly rejected payment for the cancer treatment that his doctor was like, this is your last hope, even though it turns out that was in violation of state law. And when we were just talking about this project, outside of the context of Scripps, she was like, oh yeah, this local station did an interview with him on TV days before he died. And, it's this tragic footage of this bald man crying, being like, I don't want to die. And it turns out it was your Grand Rapids station. And so then I feel like I didn't even do any real work. It just was like, oh, connection. And I was like, maybe this is how we start off, because you guys were a new partner. So yeah.
No, it was another case of, the collaboration, the web of collaborations, because we have such a deep partnership with our stations, we could very easily go to them and have access to that. But then what happened was the reporter shared the information about the whistleblower, and our reporter was able to do this remarkable one-on-one interview with the whistleblower where, it was like one of those 60 Minutes moments.
Yeah, the whistleblower was from inside the insurance company,
Yeah.
so he gave us all the emails where they were talking about this man's case at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, and it was, we did the usual, highlight the places where it was very clear that they were denying this gentleman the care. And then we were able to go to this gentleman's family, the Van Patten family, and do an interview with them after he had passed away and after we had talked to the whistleblower. So our part of it, really because you brought the story to us, was, I would say, icing on the cake, or bringing another perspective to it. I love the idea of starting from the beginning and finding subject matter that really we could both be doing a lot more digging into, especially accountability investigations.
Yeah, and so now, our partnership, from my perspective, went off really smoothly. So now I get to go back to my team, the team who worked on this story, my bosses, et cetera, and be like, this is where this story traveled, where it would not have gone otherwise.
So that's the thing. It was aired on Scripps News, which is a national news organization that is available over the air in 97% of the country. It is on literally every single CTV platform you could think of, all of the ones that are 4 letters of, that seem like they have no vowels. It is also a digital operation, and so this content appeared on our website. It appeared on our station websites as well, and on our stations that took the video piece. So it just kept going and going and going and going.
And that's what I'm saying is, like, icing on the cake, I feel like you're underselling it, because that has turned the story into something completely different from what it would have been if it had just been published on our website, read it on Apple News, big deal.
I like icing, so it's.
I prefer icing, but I agree with you entirely.
So it extends the life, it extends the impact, the points of distribution. It seems like it's a win-win just across the board. You have the intellectual heft there, the reporting heft, and everybody takes something away from this, of course. Now
Can I make one more point about that?
Yeah.
Since starting Scripps News, we have talked about collaborations, journalistic collaborations, and Scripps News has partnerships with the Washington Post and Politico and Bellingcat and other news organizations. And it's not just to get, great video for us or great stories for us. It's an important journalistic thing for us. We believe that, frankly, it is a tough time for journalism across the board. And the more we share, the more audiences see how important journalism is and what the result is. And Adam talked about it today, give light so that people can find their own way. We really do believe if we partner up, frankly, in some cases, across competitors, it's better for the greater good.
Yeah. Well, Stefan, you're listening to this as a technologist again, so I'm curious, what are you thinking as you're hearing these projects described in some detail in terms of how technology could potentially intermediate to increase these are long haul projects, they take months to do, so increasing maybe the efficiency or even potentially the ROI of a project like this?
So, what is interesting is that, you're, in these stories, you have a beginning, like, maybe an idea or something happened and so on. And then, you start to share that story with other people. And then you have to make it. You have to fabricate the story that you are going to actually publish or put on the air. So we are more on that phase of the project, if you want. And the idea is that, new system there's this new it's not that new, but this new concept of story-centric. What does that mean? Is that it means that the organization of how you structure your information, your raw footage, the comment, the assignment, the organization around it is going to be structured around a story, because you don't know whether that story is going to end up in an evening show or whether it's going to end up in various digital platforms. Actually, it's going to end up probably in all these places at the same time, though not necessarily the same version. You're going to assign different work to different people. So how we structure that, how we make it more efficient, easy to track, I mean, this is what we work on. We work on how to actually to also hide some of the complexity of that fabrication process, because it is complicated. At some point, media needs to be transcoded, needs to be edited, needs to be, different version. If it is for digital, you may have text on screen, which is completely different from, I don't know, closed caption or things like that. So you need to do all this work around these objects that you are producing. And basically, we want to make as much as possible, automate some of the process so that at the end, journalists can focus on the creative part of the story. Of course, there is the rendering of how you're going to do the pictures, the graphics, whatever, but also just, spending time on reporting on these stories, finding the ideas,
Which takes a
working
lot of time,
together. So.
as everyone here can attest.
If I could jump in for a moment, because we have been on Gillette for a long time, and some of that back-end flipping, where the producers they no longer have to take 3 or 5 steps to get this piece of finished video to a cloud server to get on air. That's been game-changing for us, even recently with the fast channels.
Yeah. Well, Meredith, I want to stick with you because I asked you about the Telemundo collaborations before, but you have collaborative work going all across NBCU local, multiple levels at once. And you've had a kind of organic process there in cultivating a collaborative culture, and you have these regular share calls as a part of that. Can you describe what those are?
Sure, and it's probably something that I imagine, Lee, you do regularly with your investigative teams across the country. So we have consumer investigative units, and while share calls are maybe just like table stakes or expected, it's the culture of the call and the expectation and what the people who join the call come with. And it's all about culture. It's about the collegial, helpful, if you win, we all win attitude across the stations. And we've layered onto that, in the pandemic, we all started using Teams. So now, whether you use Slack or Teams, that group that joins together monthly for the share calls are active daily on Teams chats. So it cuts down the email clutter, and they can immediately share, I just received a statement from X government official on this story that you broke yesterday, you can update it. It's enabled us to go from teams of 3 or 5 people in a market to hundreds across the division. We also, we had established a central unit to take in viewer hotline calls, primarily initially for our consumer unit. Well, now we've been able to tap into that database of calls to power other stories or to see trends that are developing. So Chicago found a story of the Hyundai Kia car theft. They saw locally that the car thefts were going up 500% because of the way certain models were built. So they went on to the Teams chat, told other stations about it. So now the stations were able to go into the database and see if they've had viewers calling in about that. We did see that. So then all of a sudden, one market's enterprise story became an enterprise story across the whole division, but localized, because they had local consumers who were able, viewers who had called in, but the story hadn't bubbled up because it was one individual call. And then the other thing that's been important, I know a lot of us have been to IRE, in person, having some in-person group meetings back again just really builds those bonds when you have people in disparate cities all across the country. So that's been super helpful.
Great. I want to remind you, if you have a question in the audience, I'm going to ask one more and then give you a chance to do that. I want to tie this discussion explicitly back to today's overall theme of adapting to a culture of continuous crisis. And I'm wondering, and I have been wondering as I've watched all these kind of collaborations unfolding over the last year or two, is this way of working a sort of necessary part of that adaptation for a station group or just news groups more widely? Do we have to be more collaborative now in order to survive and be relevant to news consumers in this year?
I think absolutely. I think there's no question. Particularly in organizations like mine, which isn't nearly as big as Meredith's, but has a lot of different parts to it. If we're not collaborating with each other, if we're not utilizing the IP, utilizing the know-how across all the different parts of our organization, then we're wasting it. You taught the panel before was about archiving, or maybe two panels. I mean, it's almost like we all of the talent, the brain talent, is archived in different places. We need to be bringing all those things together so that our whole can be a better product.
I mean, I think it's not necessary, it's essential. It really is. And like to Meredith's point, it's easier because of technology. It is easier now to collaborate than ever before. And it's essential to our mission as journalists. And quite frankly, it's essential for us for survival in the industry we're in. You know, we are stronger when we work together and we get our product seen by more people, I believe. The journalism is definitely better too.
Are you all finding that culturally you're able to bring people on side with this kind of thinking? Is it difficult, or some people kind of dug into more lone wolf ways of working and they're less collaborative, or do you find that this is something that galvanizes your organizations?
I think when, a lot of us have been in HQ roles. When you have an HQ team that has a mandate and says, okay, you're all going to cover this red light camera story now, that doesn't work. If it bubbles up from the people at the stations who are caring about their local market, their local viewer, but they can find power and energy in successes across the group, that's, I think, the real magic.
But I also think that it goes beyond our own companies. From back in my days as a field producer overseas, if you covered a story overseas, I mean, we were very competitive with NBC, or I was at ABC, and very competitive with the other nets. But if you were in a place where you needed to help each other, if your cameraman missed the shot, oh yeah, we were sharing. Don't tell the people upstairs. But it was more because we understand how important the work was and how important the work is to the people we're showing. I think across organizations now, we still have that desire to make the work mean something to everybody. And so some of our competitive, yes, we are all competitive with each other, but we would also rather that the journalism work.
Well, you have the common concern of trust, right? That there's a massive trust issue, and all of you gain by presenting the most legitimate, well-sourced and useful news possible.
Can I answer your question?
Go for
You
it.
just said, I'm speaking outside of my pay grade here, but something that I'm hearing, right? Like, we all have seen the impact on our industry and on our culture from reactive approaches to media to a culture of crisis. And so what I'm hearing, ProPublica is just built this way, but also what I'm hearing from everything that you are all talking about is responses, like thought out responses to a culture of crisis, as opposed to just something that's just trying to keep up with everything as it's happening. Therapy speak, but yeah.
Did we have any questions in the audience real quick before? Yes. We have a mic here if you want to.
Run up.
Hi, thank you. I've worked on ENG crews in the past, and I do have to say that if someone needed an audio feed or something like that, we would help each other out. But that's not my question. There was a failure of collaboration, or I don't know what, when the North Shore leader on Long Island broke the story about the misappropriation of campaign funds for Santos. So is the radar now, do you now have a wider radar net for those types of stories? I mean, this wasn't a hyper-local election. It was a hyper-local newspaper, but they were covering a national election. And so they're still asking questions as to why this story never got any further than that.
Well, it did eventually, of course. And then,
Yes,
and
it
then we
did
talked before
eventually. But the
that
question is why wasn't it grabbed right away? I know, did I speak with you earlier about it? Yeah, and about potentially newspapers not thinking that it was a story worth following up. I don't know why, but is there an outreach now to, let's say, more local newspapers to see what's going on, to see what actually is potentially a national story?
Well, I will agree with you that, and I was surprised when
Yeah.
that story broke, that no one had broken it before, or it hadn't gotten more of a megaphone before it was finally picked up. Was it the Times that picked it up eventually? I think it was the Times. I will say that at my news organization, we look at a lot of information. We look, broadly at what's going on all over the U.S. We also are partnered with our station group, and they're looking broadly within their markets. But the number of potential news organizations to keep track of just keeps growing. And so that, as important as that is, it becomes harder and harder and harder. I'm not making an excuse for what happened with the Santos story. I'm just saying that it is, the bar is high to be able to see everything across. I mean, as a national news organization, I'm not sure anyone within Scripps News would have even come across that newspaper to read that story, even
and
in
I'm
a
not-
political
not
year.
asking
No,
that
I'm not being
specifically.
defensive. I'm just saying
Yeah.
there's just a lot out there to keep, your finger on the pulse of, and it just gets harder and harder because news organizations keep popping up everywhere.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly when they broke the story, but
It was before
as
the
is
election.
always the case, what else was happening in the news cycle
right.
around that time? Were other big stories locally in New York or, by the New York Times overshadowing that? Unfortunately, that often plays a part in how much attention a certain story gets or doesn't get, or why something from a hyper-local news source does or doesn't bubble up.
The good news is it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, it was a little bit of torture for all of us, but
Yeah.
I do think on that, a lot of collaboration, a lot of that is on relationships though too, and we have the relationship with ProPublica, they have that with Scripps. So when you have those relationships and trust, I think those stories, if not, you're just looking to see what else is out there. And if you've never heard of this organization, it's just, there's just so many different things. A lot of it is just relationships and who you trust and know.
so the local entities should also bubble up
I think so,
themselves.
yes.
Yeah. Just real quick for the,
Yeah, organizationally, how have you incentivized, other than a memo from the executive vice president to the general managers, congratulations, you're going to do block 3, or congratulations, you're going to be supplying stuff. Maybe exposure works for that, but the collaborations, people may not be inclined to collaborate because they may not be incentivized. What incentives are you using for that?
I mean, so from our point of view, if we go to a reporter, hey, do you want to collaborate with ProPublica? I mean, they're going to say yes because it's ProPublica, to be honest with you. We hire people, we look for people who want to do good work and want to do good journalism. And I think as long as you hire people like that and then present them with collaborations that are good journalism with smart people on the other side who are good to work with, I think it has worked out for us every time.
this is for many people a calling, let's not forget.
it
But
is.
there's another part of it, which is generally, there's something that you can give that partner, that other person in your organization, that newsroom or that team would not have had access to this particular, video that was on the cutting room floor of the network, shoot that day. So it is, yes, it's a calling, and we, want everyone to react that way, but it's also transactional in some ways. Look, we have all this we can give you. Can you help us with this?
And sort of on because I sort of work on individual projects with reporters, with editors, selling them on something like a Investigate TV partnership. I had a mentor one time tell me this advice. It's going to make me sound like a crazy person, but it's newsrooms are driven by ego and envy, and if you can appeal to one of those two things, you can kind of get whatever you want. Which it sounds really maniacal, but actually there's a very positive way to look at it. Which is
Ego in a good way.
Yes.
ego in a good way, and envy in a good way. It's like, so because we'd already done these projects with Gray TV, I had worked with reporters who I knew more or less could handle the collaboration, and so then we got to say to the whole newsroom, look what your story did. Look at the impact that it got. We got impact from our Poison Air project that we would have never gotten as an organization. And so just making sure that internally, I'm not calling any of the shots, but I can make sure that the president knows that this happened and that that person's getting sort of recognition for that. And so really positive incentives illustrating it is sort of my small scale approach.
So for Kengo, who this is his first panel, here's the headline: Ego and envy drive every successful collaboration. We got it.
And he is the great king.
That's right. That's right. Well, on that note, I want to say thank you to all of the panelists for great insights today, great pragmatic advice, I think, about how you're pulling these off at your stations, at your groups. It's fascinating work, and we will keep an eye on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.